So let's talk about Extensys Font Link. This is our newest third-party workflow action. And Font Link is a module for Universal Type Server. And Universal Type Server sort of solves your font management problems. It helps you manage and maintain and keep in compliance with all your font licenses. But what Font Link does is it actually delivers the fonts for an InDesign document before it's being processed by InDesign server. And so you simply add the Extensys Gather Fonts action to your workflow to identify and match the precise fonts required and deliver a custom document fonts folder to InDesign server. So let's actually switch to a demo. All right, so here I have two different workflows that are configured. So one is called my missing fonts workflow, and this is a standard workflow. So I have a content XML file, and I'm going to render that into an InDesign document and export out a PDF. So I run this workflow, and this should take just a few seconds to complete. And I can look in my log for create InDesign document, and I can immediately see that I've got a whole bunch of missing fonts for this document. And if I look at the actual PDF file, I can see in my properties that it's got Minion and Myriad Pro, which are the fallback sort of placeholder fonts when font is missing out of InDesign. Now, if I look at my Gather Fonts workflow, you'll see that I have the Gather Fonts, and here I've supplied it with the InDesign template. And so that's the only input that's required. There's no configuration. It's super simple. So you supply the InDesign document. This is going to take that document. It's going to query the file, find out what fonts are in it, and it's going to build a document fonts folder. And then we're going to copy that document's font folder into my job folder. So this is using one of our workflow variables to automatically reroute that dynamically. And then again, it's just the same standard as it was before, where I have a create InDesign document and an export to PDF. So just to make sure that everything is from the beginning, I'm going to remove the existing documents font folder that I did earlier this morning when I was testing. So now I'll run this again. And again, just a few seconds. And we look in here and we notice, oh, there's a document fonts folder in the actual job itself. And in here, you can see all of my fonts. I can look in my log file, and there are no missing fonts listed. And then I can look at the actual PDF. And we can see that all the fonts that we want are there across all the different styles. And look in our properties. And again, we see all of the embedded subset typefaces that we want in there. So that's the Font Link integration. Again, super simple, super easy. All it requires is to add the new Gather Fonts action, and obviously to have the Universal Type Server from Extensys with the Font Link module for that.